From the Oklahoman newsroom, it's time for another Thunder Thursday here with our Thunder coverage team. I'm Jenny Carlson, joined by columnist Barry Trammell, Thunder beat writers Eric Horn, Brett Dawson, and no, we're not going to talk about Bob Stoops, although we probably could if we wanted to. Yeah. We could talk about the Florida connections, him and Billy Donovan, if we wanted to.
I mean, I woke up yesterday morning and did some preliminary work on a prominent coach in our market leaving for another job, and turns out I ended up writing about a different situation. So
another high-profile coach leaving. Yeah, no, but that coach I assume you were getting ready to write about is Billy Donovan.
Bill Donovan.
Guys, he's continually being rumored for really big, high-profile college jobs. This time around, Ohio State after Thad Matta. He is leaving. Brett, it sounds like this is not going to happen. It sounds like Ohio State's going a different direction. But this is kind of a churn we might need to get used to for a little while, it seems like.
Yeah, Ohio State may be going in a direction that still gives us a little connection to it. It sounds like, according to Jeff Goodman at ESPN, they've offered the job to Greg McDermott, the father of Doug McDermott, the Thunder forward. So we might still get a local connection to that. I didn't think this was a job necessarily that would appeal to Billy Donovan. But here's where it's a little different from the situation with Indiana in March. It's open in June, and that's a very different situation when you're an NBA coach. It's a situation where if there was a time to leave, this is one that gives you that out. Urban Meyer is there. They're very good friends from their days in Florida. So there were some things about this job that could be appealing on paper. I don't think Billy Donovan wants to go back to college. I think he's tired of what was going on in college basketball. I think he's tired of the recruiting piece of it. But here's the thing. Ultimately, Duke is going to open. North Carolina is going to open. Kentucky is going to open. And if Billy Donovan is here at those times, then he's going to come up for those jobs as well.
Eric, when you see Billy Donovan's name pop up, is that more a reflection of the job he's done with the Thunder, the fact that he's only 2 years removed from coaching the college ranks, and people just assume maybe he wants to go back after a long career coaching college ball? What is the sort of, I mean, kind of get inside the why Billy Donovan is a coach that keeps getting mentioned for these jobs?
I think it's a combination of two things. I think, first of all, it's the success that he had at Florida, being a guy who's the last guy to win back-to-back national championships. He was there for almost nearly 20 years and went to multiple Final Fours. And then there's just the notion that when he came to the Thunder, they were a team that had Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook. They were a team that you thought was going to contend for NBA championships for the next however many years that those two were together. Then Kevin Durant leaves town, and all of a sudden you got a different situation than what Billy Donovan came to Oklahoma City to coach. So I think those two factors are the key ones when it comes to people continually putting Billy Donovan's name in for those coaching jobs. And it's not just Billy Donovan either. It's a guy like Brad Stevens, too, who continually his name comes up because he had such success at Butler. He's a guy who has a proven track record of being able to win with a little bit of talent. If Brad Stevens, a guy like that who's coaching with the Celtics now, hypothetically went to a bigger program like an Ohio State or a Duke or a Kentucky, there's no telling what he could do.
Yeah. Is this, Barry, as I think about the basketball coaching life, I mean, there's positives whether you're in the college ranks or in the NBA, but to think that you would go from coaching the NBA where it's all basketball all the time, you're working with professionals, you don't have the headaches of recruiting, are college basketball people overselling how good it is to be a college basketball coach when they link Billy Donovan to these jobs?
There's no doubt about it. This is a quality of life issue. What do you want to do with your life? Do you want to go chase 17-year-old kids at AAU camps in Las Vegas and Orlando and places like that, and talk to their agents and talk to their AAU coaches and people that are a little bit on the shady side? No, you don't want to do that if you don't have to. The college coaches wouldn't do it if they could get out of it, and they would like to figure out a way to get out of it. So you don't see many NBA coaches going back to the college game if they have a good option. Now, Rick Pitino and John Calipari, they sort of flamed out in the NBA and landed at great jobs back on the college campus, but you're not going to see too many guys leave a good NBA position, which Billy Donovan has, for the college game. And why does it happen? Well, we're to blame. I mean, let's not get too complicated about how this occurs. We have a coaching opening in Oklahoma City. What do? We just come up with a list of names. How much in-depth investigation and reporting is actually done in that? It's us sitting around a table like this and writing names on a tablet.
Thinking about possibilities.
That's how names get out, and we might write a story and say, here's some possibilities. That's how names get out. That's how Billy Donovan's name got out for Ohio State, how it got out for Indiana, how it'll get out for North Carolina and Duke and Kentucky. It's not to be taken too seriously. It's FAO, for amusement only.
Except for those people that have to cover the team that you write about, their coach, and then they got to be like,
exactly.
And for all the reasons we listed, we tend to look at certain characteristics that might help a team that has a coaching vacancy. For instance, if the Thunder, who struggled on offense the past year, we thought of a guy, just us as a group, like Alvin Gentry might be a good guy to bring in for the Thunder, because Alvin Gentry's a guy who has a history of producing some high octane offenses. But Alvin Gentry didn't get fired, so that dream was dashed, and now we don't have a great person to talk to in Alvin Gentry in postgame or pregame. So
yeah.
And the other thing is, if Ohio State opened in March, I don't think anybody would have even put Billy Donovan's name in the mix. I don't think anybody would have thought that was the kind of job that could attract a Billy Donovan. But because it's June, and because of this thought that a lot of college basketball people have that he'll probably will want to go back to college basketball, this is one that just because of the timing, I think his name is there.
Okay, guys. Lastly, if you're Ohio State or another seemingly high-profile program out there, and Billy Donovan is a guy that you actually want, what would have to be in your pitch? Anybody want to take a stab at what you feel like you'd have to say to even have a shot at convincing Billy Donovan to come join your team?
Well, one thing you might say is, Billy, at Ohio State, the players are going to listen to you virtually all the time. Whatever you say generally goes. You're the king of the castle. You're in charge of not just the ball team, but everything else. You're in charge of all the support personnel. You're in charge of everything. Now, personally, that wouldn't appeal to me, and I don't know if it appeals to Billy Donovan, but it appeals to some coaches. Yeah. So the sort of monarchical system is prevalent on the college campuses, and that ego works with some coaches.
Would part of the pitch have to be the dollar signs? How many zeros and that number you're throwing out?
You better. I mean, that's got to be the first part of the pitch. Beyond anything else, you better offer John Calipari money, Coach K money. If you don't do that, you're not getting a phone call.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, I think what I think you said at first, Brett, is right. The fact that these big jobs, the blue bloods, when they come open, I think we're going to hear Billy Donovan's name out there. All right, guys, let's talk about Enes Kanter for a second. The ongoing saga with his father. Well, it started with Enes Kanter himself, obviously, a few weeks ago, having his passport revoked and his father's arrested. And at this point, guys, Eric, it sounds like his dad has been released. That's the report out there. Obviously, it's hard to verify these things. But that's what we're hearing. Where does that leave things?
Well, it leaves it in a better place than it was a couple days ago, because Enes Kanter's dad was apparently he was detained for 5 days, and Kanter had been outspoken and said he's still going to speak out, even though his family was at risk during this time. But it's a good news. From everything I've heard, Turkish prison is not a game. Yeah. So for Enes Kanter to have his family safe is a good thing, but it doesn't necessarily remove the possibility that this could happen again. Yeah. Enes Kanter's family is still in Turkey. There's really no way that they can get to the United States, because the Erdogan regime, if they were to leave or try to leave, they could just cancel their Turkish passports the same way they did to Enes Kanter a few weeks ago when he was in Romania. So it's still a scary situation, and it's one where you kind of question whether or not Enes Kanter should still be as outspoken as he is, because we've seen that they're not afraid to go into Enes Kanter's family's home in Turkey and kind of take his family, basically as hostages, and see what they want to do to see if they can try to get Enes Kanter extradited back to Turkey.
Yeah. Brett, I think the question of, the balance between Enes Kanter wanting to be a spokesperson essentially for people in his homeland that he feels like are being oppressed, are being killed, tortured, all the things that he's talked about and all the things that are out there in the mainstream media about what is happening in Turkey. But does he have to strike a balance? Is there going to have to be some sort of maybe not backing off entirely, but a little bit of a slowdown in some of the stuff he's doing?
Well, I don't think he's going to back off. I think he's established that he wants to be a voice for voiceless people in Turkey and voiceless people, I think, among Turks abroad as well. A lot of what Erdogan is doing in these situations with Enes Kanter, they know Enes Kanter isn't getting extradited. A court would have to prove that he had done something criminal in the United States a court here in order for them to work out an extradition agreement. That's not going to happen. They're not getting Enes Kanter back in Turkey. But what this does is send a message to other Turkish citizens abroad. You know, you're not safe. You have people here. There are things we can do to make your life difficult. And so I think from that standpoint, yeah, he probably has to consider not the things he's saying, maybe some of the ways he's saying them. He's been pretty assertive in some situations. The tweet about, you know, I'll come back to Turkey and I'll spit in your hate-filled faces. Things like that, I think, are pushing the line. I think there are other things that are very legitimate points to be making about Erdogan, and somebody should be making them. Some of that other stuff, I think, because of the stakes here, he has to be careful.
Yeah, Barry, who knew we were going to have to become such experts in Turkish politics and those sorts of things? But I mean, this is serious stuff. I mean, a summer where we thought, you know, stomaching watching the Warriors in the playoffs and Russell Westbrook's baby, that was going to be the biggest news. This is pretty heady stuff for Kanter, for the whole organization of the Thunder.
Yeah, this is very serious. And, you know, Enes made the joke on his exit interview talking about he's going to travel and go see the world, and he's going to go to Korea, the good one, he said, and we laughed about it. But when you think about North Korea and some of the civil rights issues, human rights issues that are there, and then all of a sudden it comes back and strikes Enes Kanter right in the face in his homeland. So it's serious stuff, and it's you know, you feel when you get to know a guy like Enes Kanter, you really feel for him going through something like that, and you're just glad that it's not anything that we have to face on any kind of regular basis.
You know, guys, I know we've talked about Enes Kanter as it relates to his future with the Thunder. But talking about this situation makes me think the Thunder's an organization that, frankly, if you're in the NBA, you would want this type of organization behind you in a situation like this, in terms of, you know, helping. There's a long-standing narrative about how the Thunder has really helped Enes Kanter, done things for him to make him feel comfortable. But I'm just sitting here thinking, if he gets traded, basketball stuff aside, I hope that he lands with an organization that has a structure to help him, because this situation's not going away. If he leaves Oklahoma City, it's not like it's suddenly magically vanished from his life. I hope he's in it if he does get traded, because we all know, guys, that the Thunder is not, I mean, it's not like every other organization. There are some organizations that wouldn't be nearly as helpful as the Thunder been in this situation.
No, that's a great point, Jenny. And you know, the Thunder is one of the most well-run organizations in the league, so it kind of troubles you to think, like, what if Enes Kanter lands in an organization like a New York with the Knicks or Sacramento, where things aren't as stable in the front office. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Kanter's really been in an ideal situation since he was traded here from Utah, in terms of, you know, having the nurturing base around him to be able to comfort him and make things easier for him in terms of his religion, for letting him have his outspoken beliefs, despite this being an organization that hasn't been known for being, you know, very outspoken and out there and freewheeling like some other organizations. But they've had a proper enough structure to where they can help him and also let him be himself at the same time.
Yeah, really interesting. All right, guys, well, let's turn to something not nearly as important to finish up this Thunder Thursday, and that's the NBA Finals. We've watched this thing unfold. We saw finally an exciting game in Game 3, but ultimately a Warriors win. Barry, you said before these finals started, a sweep was going to happen. Now you're looking more and more like Notre Dame here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a good game last night, and I thought the Cavs would play really well. And Cleveland, I'm not even sure they played that well. I mean, 12 of 43 on three-point shooting, and two guys did almost all the heavy lifting, LeBron and Kyrie Irving. But, you know, you get the NBA Finals, you don't expect a blowout every night. So Cavs put up a good fight, but you gotta score down the stretch, and they did in the last 3.5 minutes, and Golden State made the shots. They got the big tall fella that seems to be playing basketball at a high level, and he's pretty good down the stretch, and that seems to have helped them. That was a nice addition. I applaud the scouting department of the Golden State Warriors. Nice find on Kevin Durant.
Guys, there's a lot of talk after Game 3 out there amongst fans about Durant establishing his place at the top of the pecking order above LeBron James. Eric, the look on your face tells me you're skeptical of such talk.
We were having this discussion before we came in here. We live in a very microwave society where we want to have this instant turn. We all want to be the first to recognize when something's the changing of the guard or the torch is being passed. There's no torch passing. Kevin Durant is playing with a better group of players, which allows for him to do the great things with more consistency and more efficiency than he did with the Thunder. And that's not a knock on Kevin Durant, who hit a big-time shot last night that's going to go down as one of the biggest shots he's ever hit in his career, right in the face of LeBron James. But if you looked at the way that game was playing out, the Warriors are able to go into the fourth quarter with a guy like Klay Thompson on the bench, just sitting there, just waiting. They're able to go deeper into the fourth quarter with guys like Durant and Steph Curry, just sitting there, just waiting, catching their breath, so they can go full throttle at the end of games. So you can't just dismiss LeBron James's greatness after one game of seeing Kevin Durant close out at the end, because it's a different situation. LeBron James was gassed at the end of that game. So we're not going to make him the second best player in the world all of a sudden because he's facing these insurmountable odds in this super team. So Kevin Durant is great. Let's not pass the torch or the crown to him after one game. Let's just acknowledge the fact that he's on a better team.
Yeah, let's give some people a little history lesson here. Before LeBron James came back to the Cavaliers, those dudes kept winning the lottery. That's what they kept doing. What Golden State did before Kevin Durant came there was they kept winning games. 73 of them. They got to the NBA Finals. They got, famously, a 3-1 lead in those finals and didn't quite close the deal. Then they added Kevin Durant. I have a sneaking suspicion that had they added LeBron James instead of Kevin Durant, things would be going equally as well right now for the Golden State Warriors.
Yeah, great point. And, I think I think we all knew when Durant went that life was going to be easier on him. I mean, that was essentially the biggest thing that was my takeaway. He's going to be able to score more easily. And I think we've seen that play out. But, guys, we saw, Barry, and you had a little bit on your blog about this, I think it was yesterday morning, what can Cleveland do? You talked about Kyrie. You talked about Kyle Korver. Some of the things that you talked about happened, but it's not enough when you've got 4 All-Stars out there for the Warriors. Great coaching. I heard Steph Curry afterwards. What do you have? 13 rebounds last night or something ridiculous? I mean, he talked about Ron Adams has been challenging him to help the bigs. You talk about great coaching, but I think coaching, I know Tyronn Lue won a title last year, but I think that the Warriors win in the coaching category too. That was pretty evident last night at some times that Cleveland could have used a little bit better direction.
Yeah, I don't know. Actually don't know who's doing the coaching. The Warriors seem fine without Steve Kerr. So, I don't know who's doing it, who's responsible. Last year, he sat out half the season. They seemed to be okay. So, somebody's coaching them up, whoever it is. But I do sense that Tyronn Lue is a little bit struggling to find the right answers. And frankly, it's hard to find the right answers when you don't have the right team, and Golden State's got the right team. But Tyronn Lue was hired to sort of be a LeBron whisperer, if you will, and just sort of get rid of the Blatt-LeBron conflict that seemed to have developed in Cleveland. Lue did a great job with that, but if you need him to X and O you to an NBA title in this series, it's probably not going to happen.
And frankly, it's hard to X and O to a series win when you're not capitalizing on all the things you need to do to be winning as a player. There was a stretch where Cleveland was getting stops on the Warriors and they weren't finishing on their end. So that's empty possessions. You just can't have empty possessions against this Warriors team when they've got 3 of the best shooters of all time on one team. Yeah. That's not an X's and O's thing. That's just a make a basket thing. And Cleveland was missing a lot of gimmies that put them in a position to give up that lead quickly at the end of the fourth quarter.
Well, and you talk about one of the things that Darnell Mayberry, who made a little appearance behind you there, Eric, at one point, he photobombed you. But Darnell and I were talking last night about the margin for error, and that's something we talked about with the Thunder during the regular season. When you lose that star power, your margin for error just shrinks down so small, and that's the thing. The Warriors are pushing a great team like the Cavs to such a small margin for error. Any turnover, the Warriors can turn it over. They can have a bad possession. They can have a couple bad possessions. But then all of a sudden they come up with a couple possessions where they hit threes, and it magically erases it. The way that they really force teams to have that razor-thin margin of error. That's the thing, Brett, that really strikes me that is so hard to deal with. It's obviously tough physically, but mentally, that has to be a really tough hurdle for a team to overcome.
Yeah, if you look, other than the way Golden State shot the ball at the very beginning of the game, they were so hot from three-point range, and then the end of the game, some of the miscues that Cleveland had and the way that Golden State capitalized. Other than that, for the bulk of the game, Cleveland really played closer to its peak than Golden State was to its peak. It really played a better game for the most part. You get great games out of LeBron and Kyrie Irving. Not a great offensive game out of Kevin Love, but I thought probably his best defensive game, most impactful game maybe that he's played in the series in a lot of ways. All these things sort of going in your favor. Kyle Korver rises from the dead in the series. He hasn't really done anything. All this stuff is going in your favor, and then just it takes like 2 quick gut punches from the Warriors, and you're down. And that's got to be tough mentally. I know that Golden State rallied, or that Cleveland rallied back last year from 3-1 down. Maybe they're not totally out of winning a couple games in this series, but it sure feels like it after last night.
And you have to. We can't talk about this without crediting the Warriors' defense. They played outstanding defense throughout the playoffs in this series in particular. Aside from Kyrie Irving making some extremely high difficulty shots last night, the Cavs might have gotten blown out if it wasn't for Kyrie Irving's just improvisation and being able to dribble, get past guys, score over multiple defenders. Klay Thompson defended him well again, but great players score, as we saw in the Rockets-Thunder series. Andre Robertson did a great job on James Harden, and James Harden would still come away with 38 points. That was the same thing with Kyrie going up against Klay Thompson last night. But when you're making shots difficult on guys throughout the course of a game, that'll wears on you, and it ends up being a benefit for you later on down the stretch because the Warriors can put in the effort that they need to on defense, and then, of course, with so much shooting on the floor, they're able to get easier shots than anybody else in the league.
Okay, lastly, no hot takes required here, but the Warriors win this thing in 4, sweep through the finals, sweep through the playoffs, undefeated in the playoffs. Best team ever? I mean, is that – Brett, you brought up history lessons earlier, so I don't want to overlook great NBA teams that have been out there before with multiple Hall of Famers on the floor at the same time. But, I mean, where's the argument for this team if they do that?
Well, the argument is that nobody beat them in the playoffs and they won a title, and it's never happened. So if they do that, there's the case. I mean, it's a strong case, I think. The question is, when you don't see a team get tested through the playoffs, does that say more about the team or does it say more about the competition? Yeah. And that's the thing I think we don't know at this point. It feels like there's a bigger gap between the Warriors and everybody else than we've had, even with those great Bulls teams, even with those Lakers teams. The gap feels wider with this Warriors team. But what does that say? Are the Warriors that much better? Is everybody else that much worse?
I'm not willing to say they're the greatest team ever. I think you can lump them in with a few of the greatest teams ever, like those 95, 96 Bulls, 86 Celtics, 87 Lakers, those kinds of teams. But they'll definitely be lumped in the group. They'll always have 16-0 if they do go undefeated. And I don't think we give the Warriors enough credit for being as resilient as they are. We saw it last year in Game 6. Even though you have the talent, you still have to go make the shots. Steph Curry still makes a bunch of high difficulty shots. These guys could just go up and down the floor and not play any defense. They choose to play defense. They stay completely locked in. You've got selfless guys like Draymond Green that are sacrificing offense where they could be scoring on another team or doing a little bit more, and they're being defensive anchors. So I think you'd have to lump them in with probably the 3 or 4 best teams ever, and not just for this season, but for the collective 3-year stretch they've been on, even before they got Kevin Durant. They're basically one Kyrie shot away and a LeBron chase down block last year from being 3-time champions in a row.
Yeah. Barry, do you give them credence to be in that group?
Well, it'd be disingenuous of me to sit here and talk about how what a capital crime it is that the Warriors are so stacked and so loaded and have such a corner on the talent in the NBA as it's currently constructed, and then say, but historically they're not that good. I mean, before they added the big tall fella, they had, by acclamation, the best 2 shooters in history together. And then you put Kevin Durant with them, and you've got defenders like Andre Iguodala and Draymond Green. I'd be hard-pressed not to make the argument. I think NBA basketball is better than it's ever been. I don't think American basketball players are getting worse. I don't think there's fewer of them. There's more than ever. And yet we got all the internationals coming over that we didn't have 30 years ago. So the talent level of the NBA is as good or better than it's ever been. And yet the these Golden State Warriors are far exceeding what we have today. So if they're not at the top, they're definitely in the discussion. Going 16-0 is a pretty emphatic statement. I'd be hard-pressed to say they're not the greatest single-season team in NBA history.
If they would have won last year, we could have said it, I think, without question, because they actually went through some adversity last year to get. This year they came across some teams that had some injuries. They added Durant, and that made for this landslide that we see now. But last year they didn't have Steph for a portion of the playoffs. They were down 3-1 to a talented Thunder team. And then they lost Draymond Green halfway through the series against Cleveland, and were still able to come within one shot of winning the finals. So last year's team, if they would have just finished it off, I think you would have had an easier time saying that that's the greatest team we've seen in the playoffs, as opposed to a team that goes 16-0 with Kevin Durant.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, well, maybe next week, if 16-0 does happen, maybe we'll be able to talk about what's more impressive, 16-0 or 73 wins. I think it's a good argument, but let's wait until it actually happens to have it. We'll have a hot take on that next week. We'll leave that to Eric. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.